Hello, I'm Gemma Fisher, a Border Collie training and behaviour expert, here to help you bring out the best in your dog. Whether you're tackling reactivity, recall struggles, or just want to understand your collie better, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about making life with your collie easier, with practical advice, hands-on solutions, and a good dose of encouragement every step of the way. And don't forget, if you want even more support, head over to our Facebook group. That's where you'll find my weekly live Q&A session, exclusive training guides, and a community of collie owners just like you. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to handle other people who are making our collies' reactive behaviour worse, such as those out on a walk, and sometimes even closer to home too. So grab a cuppa, get yourself comfy, and let's get started. Now, as usual, I was preparing for this episode, and like I normally do, I asked people in my free Facebook group what they'd particularly like some help with in relation to this topic. And Sue shared this story, and I wonder how many of you will potentially recognise similar stories of your own. She said, we live very near to Chesil Beach, and the worst encounters that I've ever had are with some holidaymakers and their dogs. One episode was when I'd put my dogs on a lead to go off the beach. A group of people came onto the beach and immediately let their 3 large dogs off the lead, and they ran straight at us. I called and asked them to call their dogs back as mine were on leads. And the answer I got was, it's a beach. Dogs are meant to run free and have fun. And they just kept walking, making no attempt to call their dogs. Another person walking with a dog off lead said she hadn't got a recall, but they were on holiday and she wanted her dog to have fun. Needless to say, I now avoid busy places when there are lots of visitors around. Does this sound familiar? Maybe you've got similar stories or potentially even worse. Today's episode is for you if you've ever felt your dog's reactivity has worsened because someone else didn't manage their dog or themselves properly. Now, one thing I want to start with is that it isn't about blame or judgment. It's about knowing how to protect your dog, even when other people don't get it. Now, let's just also be clear. Rude dog behaviour is actually a people problem. All right. Now, a dog may not have very good social skills and they may not, be very helpful if you've got a reactive dog. But that dog being close to your dog is a people problem. It's not that dog's problem. So if I go back to Sue's example, her being told it's a beach, dog should run free, that's not an excuse, is it? Like if we're across dog walking etiquette, letting dogs rush up to others is not a good idea. It teaches bad habits. Those same people may well have questions for their dog trainer, if they have one, about recall, because they haven't got a recall because of the fact that they've just let, their dog rush up to others. And the other thing is that's really important to me, and I worry about as a dog trainer, much more than I'm sure other people do, is that it can seriously knock your dog's confidence. The number of times that I have bumped into people who have said, oh, it's fine, they're a puppy. If they get told off, they'll learn. Well, truthfully, they might learn. I suppose that is a possibility. But I think they will learn one of two things. They will either learn to just keep themselves completely to themselves and be quite worried when they see another dog coming, or they might become reactive themselves later on down the line. It's not a good idea. We don't want to put puppies in a situation, as humans, we don't want to put our puppies into a situation where they get told off, because as far as they're concerned, we authorized it. We allowed them to get that close. So if they get told off as a result of that, then as far as they're concerned, they're like, oh, this is normal. This is what's supposed to happen. I'm like, no, it's not. We just need to manage the situation better when you're a wee baby. My analogy, and this will be helpful to those of you with children, but it's like letting a child learn social etiquette, learning social etiquette by being shouted at by strangers. I mean, you would never do that. We would always work to teach our children social etiquette kindly and by ourselves before, sending them out into the world, because being shouted at by strangers, that's not going to build a child's confidence any more than it's going to build a puppy's confidence. So your dog's safety is your job. All right. End of conversation. My dog's job when I'm out and about on a walk is to check in, not to charge in. All right. So those are the two really key things. My dog safety is my job, and my dog's job is to check in, not to go charging into situations without checking with me first. And check-in behavior is gold. All right, reinforce the heck out of that. So anytime you notice your dog just sort of doing a little, look back over their shoulder and just saying, oh, hey, mum, hey, dad, then, reward them. And it doesn't always have to be a food reward either. I do want to make sure that people don't turn into vending machines for their border collies, because that can be a real thing. But certainly, like, check in with them, notice them. I will just often just do something like, hi, sweetie, just a little thing to say, I saw that and I liked it. You're a good dog. Mix it up. You don't want to be too predictable when it comes to your reinforcement, but definitely reinforce any sort of check-in behavior. It's really, really good stuff. Now, if you can't rely on check-ins, so maybe you are listening to this and you're thinking, well, I can't rely on check-ins. That's definitely not me and my dog. So our dogs are on a lead or a long line. That's really kind of what we're saying. If we cannot get a good check-in from our dog, then for their safety's sake, so that they don't get into situations that, they can get into mischief, then they have to be on the lead or on a long line. That's going to be the safest way to look after them. Now, one of the ways that I keep things calm if I see a dog approaching, and not all dogs approaching, of course, are necessarily going to trigger our dogs. In my Reactivity to Resilience module, I talk about red, amber, and green dogs. Okay, so red dogs are those dogs that you just have to see them and you think, do you know what, that dog is going to cause a reaction in my dog. So those are what I would class as kind of a red dog. An amber dog is one where maybe it's a breed that your dog is not a big fan of, but they they seem to be minding their own business, so you're not too worried about it. They have the potential to cause a reaction, but it's not a definite. And then green dogs are dogs where, I often think of like an old Labrador in this situation. So they're walking along with their person, they're not rushing, they're older, so they're mooching, and as a result, those are what I describe as green dogs that just are so unlikely to provoke a reaction in another dog. So when I see dogs coming, let's say I see a red dog, a dog that I think my dogs would probably tell them to bog off if they got the opportunity. So the skill that I teach my dogs is I train them to lie down off the path while I handle the situation. And it's a practical skill that also gives me thinking time, but really importantly, it gives them clarity. So border collies like living in a black and white world. They don't like grey. They'd like to really have crisp edges to, this is what I need to do when this happens. So particularly when they're young, particularly when they're adolescent, give them a really clear job. And that is, you come over and do this, and then I will deal with this situation here. All right. And it's practical for us too, isn't it? It gives us something practical to do. Now, one thing that I do remember coming back from one walk and thinking, do you know what? That was a really frustrating walk. And it was a puppy that had run up to my dogs, and like my dogs weren't worried because I had dealt with it and so on and so forth. But the thing I really was like, fuming about was that it's not my dog's job to fix your dog's manners or your puppy's manners, because they are brilliant dogs in their role as stooge dogs when they come and help me at work. And when somebody is, in a workshop and it's paid environment, I will say to my dogs, I need you to be more tolerant than maybe you would want to be, and, so on and so forth. But out and about on a walk, no, not their job at that point. They're on their they're on their playtime. They don't have to be involved in fixing your dog's manners. It's not their job at that point. So here's a training skill that I would recommend that you go away and think about having a play with. So it's a lie down while I deal with it skill. It's not particularly fancy one, but it's just lie down while I deal with it. Now, this is something I teach in class and with my own dogs. And being able to ask for a downstay, even when your attention is elsewhere. And that's the really crucial bit. So there are lots of people that would be able to show me that their dogs can do a down and maybe even a downstay. But being able to do that downstay and then turn and talk to someone else, that's often where it's really tricky. Because at that point, your dog is like, well, all bets are off. You're not paying attention. Like, you're getting on with something over there. I'll go do my own thing. Thank you very much. So being able to do that downstay, even when your attention is elsewhere, is really, really helpful. I don't really teach classes very much anymore, but when I used to, and sometimes I still do this in workshops, this is something I would have people do. Ask your dog for a downstay and then go and have a conversation with the person next to you, and be able to have that split attention skill. The thing that your mother and your grandmother had, My mum still has, of being able to have eyes in the back of your head. That skill, that's the thing that we're working on in this particular instance. And it's a life skill. The idea is my dogs do their job. They stay calmly behind me. So as far as they're concerned, as long as they do that, they are safe because that is their job, and I will protect their right to do that. While I do mine, my job is to advocate and handle the incoming situation. All right. So we both have very clear roles in these situations. Now, if you've got a multi-dog household, you actually are in luck because this is something that can it does take some practice, but being able to practice this skill, like saying hi to one dog or working one dog whilst another dog is waiting their turn, this is a really good place to start that training off. Now, it's a little trickier if you're going out and about and you are trying to control, 2 or 3 dogs whilst you've got an incoming situation, and maybe a couple of those dogs are they have feelings about what might be happening. So if you have a multi-dog household, as I say, I would practice some work on being able to take turns. That's really helpful. But then when you come to take this skill out on the road, particularly if you've got one that is reactive, then look to do this one at a time, and then maybe do 2 at a time, something like that. Preferably with my rule of thumb when I have a young dog is that I like to, before I have a young dog, I like to have older dogs that know what they're doing. So I don't have to think about the older dog. I only have to worry about the younger dog's behavior. This is obviously trickier if you've got 2 young dogs, or if you've got a couple of dogs that you're like, well, they don't feel that role, Gemma. I haven't got a dog like yours at home just yet, and that's fine. But that's where the taking a turn skill can be really useful, and do some practice with that instead. Now, the thing to do when you're practicing this skill is to make sure your dog can do a down while you move, you're talking, and you're focusing on something else. So if you have a friend that can help you with this, you could maybe have them, come towards you, or, you can be talking to them or go and say hi to their dog, things like that. That is really valuable practice, because that's what the situation might look like when, you're out and about. Now, be careful not to reward mistakes. Okay. So if your dog is getting up and then, you go and pop them back in the down, don't immediately feed for having had to put them back in the down. But do notice when your dog holds that position, even if you're half turned away or you're chatting to someone. So mostly people only, and this is what dogs come to know, mostly people only notice when a dog moves or they do something they shouldn't be doing. But notice when they are holding that position, even when it's potentially tricky for them, and you're, because you're half turned away or you're in the middle of saying hi to your friend's dog, that sort of thing. Notice and make sure that you reward that really heavily. Now, obviously, practice this with low pressure situations first. Don't do it out and about in the real world. Do it with friends and known dogs, and then build up to more challenging ones. And maybe think about this traffic light system of, red, amber, green. I like to think of it like that. You can think of it however you like, but I think it's quite a good way of classifying different dogs. And when I help students that are working in my local area, I have in my head, I have like, okay, yeah, that would be a good green dog for, early training sessions. But then I can also think of dogs that could be red dogs, and not because they're bad dogs. I just want to make that clear too. They're not bad dogs. They're just maybe the energizer bunnies of the dog world, and they're the sort of dog that makes our dogs go, that puts my teeth on edge and can, increase anxiety. So we've talked a little bit about what we can do, but okay, when you're out walking, you see that dog coming at you from 100 foot away and the owner's nowhere to be seen. That situation, we're going to get on what to say to people, but like if you can't see the dog, this is where that rock solid lie down behind you feels like magic, because at that point, you don't have anybody else you can say, could you call your dog? Could you do, you don't have that. So being able to have your dog do, lie down there, I'm going to go deal with this. Yeah, really, really helpful. Anyway, let me come down off my soapbox. All right. You all know, all of this. It's those people that you struggle with out on a walk that don't seem to know it. So maybe this is a good video to share. Maybe this is a good podcast episode to share. So let's talk about people, all right, and how to handle them. Now, this is something that I get people to practice in the in their living room at home. I get them to look in the mirror. I get them to, talk to themselves in the mirror, because I want you to come up with some prepared responses. Now, my prepared response that comes out without me even thinking about it, it's friendly, it's firm, but it's informative, is, oh, hi, sorry, my dog doesn't want to say hi right now. It just comes off my tongue without having to think about it. Now, what I will do in addition to those words is I will probably put my hand up like I'm a traffic warden. I will repeat if needed if they didn't hear. But more often than not, when I call that out, oh, hi, sorry, my dog doesn't want to say hi, I've got a big smile on my face. And the other person's response is usually, oh, I'm sorry, mine will. Shall I put them on a lead? Would you mind? That'd be great. Thank you. Like, it's all friendly. Nobody's got any hurt feelings. And crucially, I haven't shown up that person for not being able to call their dog. That's really important. So a lot of dog trainers will say, tell people to get their dog on a lead. Well, if you can't, if you are one of those owners that cannot, then being told by someone who looks a bit cross and a bit stressed out is probably not going to encourage you to to comply. All right. Now, it is possible, I suppose, that if you said, they don't want to say hi, somebody may turn around and say, oh, but he's very friendly. We've all had that, haven't we? Again, just having a prepared response, something like, that's lovely. Mine isn't in the mood. Thanks for giving us space. Something like that. Again, said with a big smile, probably with a visual cue. So something like a hands up stop gesture, such as, like traffic warden. Some of my students do have their dogs in, either they have like a slip on their lead, like a yellow slip on their lead, or a vest that says something like, in training, no dogs, some description of why that yellow is designed to let other dog owners know from a distance that this dog potentially doesn't want to say hi. But the thing I would say about those is not every member of the dog owning population understands what that yellow means. And often that yellow will almost, and some of my students have said this in the past, it will almost draw people in to read what's on the vest or read what's on the lead. So what I would say is it doesn't replace training, popping your dog in a yellow vest or having a slip lead. And what it really doesn't do is it doesn't replace the fact that you still need to communicate, because just because you know what that yellow, lead slip or that yellow vest on your dog means, it doesn't mean everybody else does. So please don't rely on that, because putting it on does not keep your dog safe. And us being communicative is important from our dog's perspective. The other thing that I'll do is I'll sometimes use body blocking to gently step in front of an incoming dog to protect mine. I don't need to say very much, actually. Sometimes I'll make some smoochy noises and, oh, hi, sweetie, say hello to them. But often just my physical presence of saying, this space is taken is enough just to make the other dog go, oh, I'm going to stop and just back up a little bit. All right. And this is where thinking about our body language is important. I mean, I'm obviously doing these things with a fair amount of confidence because I'm, familiar with dogs. And I appreciate that, particularly if you're a first-time dog owner, you might not feel like that. But do try, if you can, to, open up your shoulders, put your sort of chest out a little bit, take up some space, because dogs do recognize those gestures in other dogs and in humans as well. So a person that looks like they are dealing with the situation and they're feeling confident is very likely to get another dog to respond. Not always, of course, there are always exceptions, and I'm not going to say it's always going to work, but it's something that is worth doing in the first instance. And the other thing I would say that you can do is you can also practice what this looks like with your dog. So in the training scenarios that we've talked about, so that they learn when you move between them and another dog, that it's their cue to just sort of chill and wait for guidance on what to do next. Now, obviously, your dog is very reactive at the point, this may feel a really long way off, and I'm not suggesting that this can be done overnight, but it's a good thing to be working towards. And if you have a dog that is extremely reactive and you are coming across people out and about, having someone with you that has very clear instructions about essentially all of those things that I've just talked about communicating, about, the physical things, hand gestures, that kind of thing that they can do. When I say hand gestures, only stop hand gestures, nothing else. When you have someone else that can do those things for you, it means that you can just concentrate on your dog. So if you have a very reactive dog, what I would suggest is, difficult though it may be, I would almost say, if I had to skip a walk because I didn't have somebody to go with for the odd day, I would probably look to think about doing that. Because if I was so stressed walking out the door, knowing it was just me and that I might bump into someone, that's not going to help either. So yeah, that's just something to think about. Now, if you need to repeat the words because people miss them, that's fine. Do so. Do try and think about making sure that your voice, my children tell me I have a natural teacher voice and it carries. But even then, sometimes at a distance, people don't hear me, so I'll repeat. Walk away if needed. Like, you don't know strangers, your dog's space. If you need to, you just kind of walk on, and I wouldn't say like run off, but I would move with purpose. Just this morning we came across a young male dog who was very interested in getting my girls' phone numbers, and clearly also was being left unsupervised somewhat by its owners. It's fine, but I don't owe this strange dog my dog space. They don't need to give out their phone numbers if they don't want to. So we just kept walking, and we walked at a good pace. I was like, you know what, we are moving. We are heading out of this space in order that you essentially, if you follow us, your owners are going to need to come and get you. But also, from my dog's perspective, they knew I was moving with purpose, and then they started to move with purpose, so we were out of the situation that much quicker. Now, so far we've just talked really about those people that we bump into out and about on a walk, haven't we? But Jacqueline had mentioned her husband, and in this was on the Facebook post where I asked people to sort of tell me, what is it, that is a problem about people, and she had brought up her husband as an example. And truthfully, I've lost count of the number of times people have said to me, do I do training for husbands? No, I don't. I'm a dog trainer. I love working with border collies. That's my jam. Because here's the thing, sometimes the other person that is causing you difficulty is inside your own house. But here's something that I want you to bear in mind. All right. It's easy to think that the reason your dog isn't progressing is because someone else in the family is inconsistent. That is a nice, easy point at them, their fault. You've put in the work, but your partner, your teenager, maybe your parent, they keep reinforcing the very thing you're trying to change. And you can get very cross about that and stamp your feet. And yes, consistency does matter. I'm not going to lie, it does. But truthfully, the better trained your dog is, the better they'll cope with inconsistency around them. Now, my own dogs don't live with expert dog trainers. Do they perform as quickly and as sharply for my kids or my husband as they do for me? No, not quite. Not far off, mind you, because I've trained them to a high standard. But as long as from my dog's perspective, the majority of the training information they're getting is consistent, and the information that I provide is on point, that will make the rest of their lives much easier. All right. So I tend not to worry about this too much. I tend to go, well, what can I control? And other people's behavior is not within my control. Even when they're related to me, it's not within my control. And here's the thing, that your collie will often default to the person they feel most connected to. So if one of your family members is, oh, the dog won't do this for me, or they won't do that for me, well, okay, I don't know what to say to you. If I'm the one that is building the trust through the training that I'm doing, then they will naturally look to me first in tricky situations. So if the other person wants that, here's what I would say is lead by example. Show them the relationship that you are building through the consistency of training that you're doing. And, go with that first. But you may also need a bit of a mindset shift, and thinking specifically about what you can control, as opposed to, the other person, because the truth is Nobody else responds, as I say, even somebody who is within our family is not within our control. So let's just take that one off the table. And rather than obsess over what someone else is doing wrong, ask, what can I do differently in this situation? All right. So I want you to think of it as a human training exercise. Now, I'll get my students to think about this when they're coming, to their collies training. I want you to think, first off, what is the most annoying thing about this for you right now? Okay. Take a piece of paper and write that down. What's the most annoying thing about this for you right now? And potentially add things like, how it's making you feel, because that may be good to get that off your chest. Have a think about what your family member might be finding reinforcing about the dog's behavior. So, for example, if the dog settles quicker for them when they shout at them, likely they're going to keep shouting at them. So we need to think about, okay, so what reinforcement is the person finding helpful about what they're doing? Because that's important, because they're going to keep doing it if it's reinforcing their behavior. Now, if partly they're doing it because they're frustrated and it's making themselves feel better in that moment, we may need to think around that. But like I say, sometimes dogs will settle quicker when they're shouted at, because they'll go, I'm in trouble, and then they'll, run off to their bed. So think about what your partner might be finding reinforcing about what they're doing, which then has an influence on your dog's behavior. Think about what you could reinforce instead. All right. What could you be doing to say, I love it when you do X, Y, Z, or, setting them up in a situation where the dog can't fail. And then you can say, do you know what? I really love it when you do X, Y, Z with the dog instead. And maybe it's doing something like teaching them a trick that your family member will like. So maybe it's going to, I don't know, find the remote control when the remote control is lost, or teaching them to go and bring them slippers, that kind of a thing. Maybe something silly and daft like that. Because sometimes when people are shouting, it's because they're extremely frustrated and they feel a bit at the end of their tether. So maybe we need to build some lighter moments into the relationship to counteract the fact that, there's a lot of negativity going around. And then the last thing I would think of is what can you manage or control? All right. So can you avoid situations where that person is in a situation where they have to shout at the dog? Is there a way that we can, use the environment in a different way? Can we use baby gates? Can we think about dogs being shut in different rooms? Can we settle them in another room for that instead? What can we manage or control to help make this situation better? All right. And like I say, just take a piece of paper and just brainstorm all over it. And if your family's open to it, or whoever it is that you would most like to change their behavior, ask them if they can sit down with you and brainstorm it together. So what is the issue we're seeing? All right. And this can be helpful because sometimes you'll learn stuff, be open to learning stuff about how they see the issue as much as how you see the issue. Think about what the dog is finding rewarding about whatever behavior they're performing. So if it is barking at the postman, what's rewarding about that, of course, is that the postman is going away. So, what can we do to maybe think about either managing or changing that situation? What could we reinforce instead? So what is a behavior that could replace what they're doing? So a good one that often springs to mind is if a dog is jumping up at the dining room table while we're eating, instead of telling them no and shouting at them, what we could do instead is we could teach them to go to their bed when we're sat at the table, and we could reinforce them staying on their bed. So that's something we could do instead. The other thing that we might want to look at is, does the behavior show up somewhere else too? And sometimes what happens is people will come to me because the dog is doing something and that's really annoying them. It can be something like, they're doing a lot of barking at dogs out and about on a walk. They're lunging and barking. But actually what they're doing is they're also doing that at the window upstairs in the guest bedroom. That behavior doesn't bother them as much because they live in a detached house or whatever, and so the neighbors aren't too much of an issue. But the behavior that's bothering them is when they're out and about, because that's embarrassing. So think also about Is this behavior something which is just in isolation, or are there other areas where it shows up as well? And please remember this really important phrase, expression, I'm not quite sure what you'd call it, but please write this down. Unsolicited advice is always criticism. All right. Let me say that again. Unsolicited advice is always criticism. All right. So rather than pointing fingers, try asking, can we look at this from your point of view? I want to understand it better. Because I hear that you're frustrated. I hear that you're, annoyed. And like, it's not fun for me to hear you like that, but I'm sure it's not fun from your perspective either. You might learn something. And here's the really important bit, it's more likely to get everyone on the same page. All right. Because like I say, if you are giving advice or you're telling people what to do, always criticism. Always, always, always. That's why people are often surprised that when they go out dog walking with me, and they're like, oh, my dog must be on their best behavior because what will Gemma think? Gemma doesn't really care. If you ask me for my help and advice, I'll happily give it to you. Happily. But I'm not going to just criticize you as we go, because unless you ask for my help, then like I say, it's always going to be criticism, and I don't want to be that person. So my final thoughts, don't expect your dog to generalize perfect behavior across everyone in the house if they've only learned it with you. All right. That's a bit much. And truthfully, what is perfect anyway? All right. But do trust that every rep that you put in still matters. All right. They're watching and they're learning and they're building trust with or without your family on board. All right. So just focus on that, because, what you're doing does still matter. So the takeaways for me when I think about, other people potentially making reactivity worse are, first off, we can't control clueless owners. All right. That's that's really the biggest takeaway for me. We can't control what other people are going to do, but we can set boundaries. We can use our voice to give other people information. Please don't get into conversations with people. Like, don't give them your dog's life history as to why they've got a yellow vest on and a jacket and all. Don't do that. But just, I'm so sorry, doesn't want to say hi. That's the boundary. Doesn't want to say hi. Train those check-ins. All right. Make sure that when your dog sees something out and about, that they are going, Mum, Dad, what should we do about this? All right. Those check-ins are gold. They're really valuable. Choose quiet routes when needed. All right. If you are going somewhere really busy, then you are likely to bump into more people, and more people potentially are people, like I say, whose response you can't control, and it might be stressful for your dog. So don't pick that if your dog is saying, you know what, that's all a bit too much for me. Be kind, but clear with people. All right. So when I say, so sorry, don't want to say hi, I've got my hand up. I'm kind. My voice is, it's not cross, but it's clear. It's really like, and my hand going up is clear. They don't want to say hi, and that is what I'm expecting to happen next. The thing that I have in my head when I'm out and about in the world with my dogs is that my training is a contract with my dogs. All right. And if my dog trusts me to keep them safe, then they'll listen better in the moments that matter. All right. But that means that the contract has to be something that I uphold, that I'm consistent with at all times, and not just when, I'm training. It has to be a thing that is happening in life as well. So what I would invite you to do in sort of a follow-up from this episode is think of a line that you can practice saying on walks. Use mine if it fits, but think about something that you can say that will just trip off your tongue, which ideally is not a instruction that another person could take the wrong way. So, like I say, the reason I say, they don't want to say hi is because it's just information. It doesn't make a judgment on their dog. It doesn't invite their dog to come over and say hi. It doesn't ask them to do something which they may not be able to do. All right. It doesn't say, put your dog on a lead, because I don't necessarily believe that lots of the people I bump into that they can do that. That's fine. It is what it is. So think of something you can practice saying on walks. And Potentially head over to the Facebook group, share your own tricky people and dog encounters in the Facebook group, get those off your chest, all right, in a group that understands a little bit about how frustrating that can be. And for those of you that have ever felt like you've had to apologize for your dog's boundaries in terms of having to say, that they didn't want to say hi, or that they don't like other dogs, know this: you don't have to apologize or explain. You really don't. You just need a plan. And your dog, and this is important, your dog needs your voice. They need you to be able to use your voice to advocate for them and to, give that information to other people when you're out and about on a walk. And that's a wrap for today. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this episode gave you the insight and motivation to make real progress with your collie. A big shout out to today's sponsor, Collie Culture Club, my online training membership designed to give you the personalised support you need. Inside the club, you'll get my expert feedback on your training, weekly live sessions with me and guest experts, and a supportive community to help you every step of the way. Don't forget, you can find all the details about the club, plus the resources mentioned in today's episode, inside our Facebook group. So be sure to check it out. Next time, we're going to be talking about how my online students have succeeded with their reactive dogs and how we did it. So stay tuned. Want to chat about this episode? Ask follow-up questions or share your, oh no, not again moments? Come tell us in the free Facebook group. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, keep focusing on progress, not perfection, because every small win counts.